Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Black Hills AI webinar, Big Themes in AI for 2026, Navigating the Age of Autonomous Agents. A recording of this episode and the slides will be made available on our YouTube channel as well as our website. Feel free to enter any questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. We invite you to follow us on LinkedIn and to visit the Black Hills AI website to learn about our other webinars. And with that, I will turn things over to Tom.
All right, thanks, Sydney. So, hi everybody. Tom Marlowe here, Chief AI Officer with Black Hills AI, and joined by Dr. Manjeet Rege, Director of the Center of Applied Artificial Intelligence and Professor at the University of St. Thomas, and trusted advisor. And if you've been with us in the past, featured webinar driver and guest and knowledge bank of all things artificial intelligence. So today we've got a really interesting topic, taking a look at some of the moves into agentic AI. And I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Dr. Rege to lead us off.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon or morning, wherever you guys are. We are currently standing at the brink of the next great evolution in AI. A moment that history will likely record as a point where the digital tool became the digital worker. For the past 3 years, the global conversation and likely many of our own internal meetings has been dominated by generative AI. We have been marveled at systems like ChatGPT, Claude, and Midjourney. But there is this shift that is happening. This concept is the bedrock of everything else we will discuss today. And one needs to grasp this shift because it changes the entire calculus of your organization. In the current paradigm, the assistant paradigm, I mean, you are the driver, you tell the AI what to do, and you review the output, and ultimately you accept all liability for the final product. In the future paradigm, and that's a shift I'm referring to, AI is no longer the tool, it is kind of the mechanic. So this is the shift from assistance to more of an autonomous environment. It is a transition where the human moves from being in the loop to being on the loop. And this is not merely a technical upgrade, it introduces completely new variables for professional responsibility, data security, and corporate liability. So, to make this more concrete, let's look at the functional difference here. First, we have the status quo, the generative AI. Think of it like a brilliant intern who's waiting for instructions. So you ask it to summarize, let's say, a 50-page patent, and so that is the prompt, and it gives you a summary, and that is the output. So its utility is immense, but it is also confined. It lives inside a chat window. It cannot leave that window to go out into your corporate network, search your document management system, access a client file, or even send an email. It waits for you. Then we have agentic AI. This is the worker. So you don't give it a prompt, but instead you give it a goal that you want to accomplish. For instance, finalize, the Q4 regulatory filing package. The agent then reasons about what is needed. It thinks, well, to do this, I need to find the latest P&L statement, cross-reference it with the compliance database, draft the narrative summary, and send the final PDF to the regulator. So it figures out the steps, accesses the necessary digital tools, be it Salesforce or SharePoint, and executes the work. So this agency means it has the authority to act in the digital world. It can read, write, and execute. This means AI is moving from being a tool for individual productivity to being a core component of business process execution. And we need to start, treating these systems not as a software, but as a delegated employee. So this brings us to um, big theme number one, the invisible workforce. I call it invisible because these agents operate in the background on servers without a user interface that you constantly watch. What makes them so transformative and so risky, uh, it comes down to three operational pillars. First, they are goal oriented. So traditional automation follows, a script. If A, then B. Agents follow a goal, maximize profit or minimize risk. So they decide the how. Second, they perform multi-step execution, and that is the key. The AI agent can chain a number of tasks together. So step one could be, identify suppliers. Step two might be draft notice. Step three might be send email. This chained reasoning allows them to, complete entire workflows that used to require a human project manager. And third, they are self-correcting. So this is the most human trait. If the system attempts, let's say, step two and finds the contract template is missing, it doesn't just crash the way a typical software used to, but in fact, it then reasons. It might say, the template is missing, and I will search the public document library for an equivalent and flag the issue that I faced. So, this ability to deviate, to adapt, and to overcome obstacles is revolutionary for efficiency. Now, I want to introduce a concept that complicates this picture significantly. We often talk about an agent in the singular, but in 2026, we'll rarely see a single agent working in isolation. We are moving toward the multi-agent ecosystem. So imagine a contracting agent that drafts a legal agreement. To do its job, it needs financial data. So it calls finance agent. It also needs to check supply chain logs. So it pings a logistics agent. So these agents talk to each other, negotiate with each other, and exchange data. So often at machine speed and often without a human seeing the intermediary steps. So this swarm intelligence is powerful, but it also creates a weak link problem. So let's say if the finance agent hallucinates a number and the contracting agent trusts it to draft a liability clause, and you have a cascading error that is buried, maybe 3 layers deep in a machine conversation. Now, diagnosing, who is at fault in a multi-agent failure will be one of the most, complex challenges for teams in the coming decade. You're not just governing a bot, you're governing a team of bots or a society of bots. So this, brings us to the most fundamental risk, the unsupervised associate. And I call it that because an associate, even a junior one, typically is supervised. An AI agent, acting on its own in a very, very um, independent manner often is not supervised. So if your old software failed, it simply crashed. It was passive. If an agentic AI system fails, it will take some action. It might, you know, initiate a wire transfer to the wrong account. It might accidentally disclose information in a unsecure communication channel, or it might, you know, maybe digitally sign a contract with terms you never approved as a human. So this is, delegation without control. And much of the legal community in the past couple of years um, have spent a lot of time worrying about copyright infringement and hallucinations, risks of creation. But with agentic AI, the risk now shifts to negligence and breach of contract, like the risks of action. So the core question will be, when an autonomous system breaches a contract, who is the principal? Is it the developer, the IT admin, right? Who sets the goal? So this existential risk leads directly to our second big theme, that is the governance imperative. If autonomous AI provides the engine for extreme efficiency, then a comprehensive responsible AI framework must provide the brakes, the steering wheel, and the navigation system. And for legal and compliance teams, responsible AI is no longer a soft, nice to have ethical statement for corporate responsibility report. It is your primary hard-edged legal defense strategy. The entire responsible AI framework must be viewed as an insurance policy in a way, right, against the enormous potential liability created by the actions by an AI agent. So you must design governance before deployment, not after a breach. So let's look at the specific gaps we need to close as far as agentic AI is concerned. So we are currently facing what I call governance gap, and characterized by two critical problems. The first is the black box problem. This is an issue of explainability. Imagine an AI agent flags a customer for fraud or freezes their assets. When you are, sued, your defense cannot simply be that, the computer said so. This is not uh, a legal defense. That is negligence, right? So you must be able to explain the reasoning, the why behind the agent's decision. So if the system is a black box, you are indefensible. We need a glass box operation rather. The second problem is the data leakage risk. And this is an issue with data being confidential, right? So the autonomous agents are designed to be efficient. They seek the path of least resistance. So if you give an agent access to confidential client info and don't firewall it, that agent might send that data to a public or a third party API, to process it faster. So to close that governance gap, your responsible AI framework must be built on three foundational pillars. First is the holding your systems accountable. So every deployed AI agent must have a registered human owner. So this is the neck to choke principle. A human must be responsible for the agent's outputs, and accountability, cannot be outsourced to an AI or to a code. Second is transparency. We need to, mandate that agents log their chain of thought. So this log, which details the steps taken, the files accessed, logic used, is the only thing that will probably protect you in terms of later on e-discovery. It must be non-editable and time-stamped as well. Third is safety. Now, this implies, technical guardrails and especially data fencing. So an agent handling, let's say, merger and acquisition documents should never be allowed to access the open World Wide Web. It must live in a sandbox. So safety is about controlling the agent's permissions, um, ensuring it cannot act outside of its approved environment, no matter how efficient the alternative path might seem. Now let's talk about the risk versus reward when it comes to responsible AI deployment and governance framework. This slide, visualizes the strategic choice before us. Now, please note that the figures presented here and the numbers, the 95%, 90% are conceptual and just for illustration purposes. So they are designed to model or to illustrate the critical trade-off you face as leaders. Scenario A, the first one, the move fast approach. You deploy agents without investing time in governance. You get massive efficiency gains, 95%. But your compliance risk also skyrockets. And this risk isn't just a probability, it's a cost. One lawsuit, one regulatory fine, can basically, wipe out maybe 5 years of efficiency savings that you might have gained. In scenario B, that is the responsible approach, you accept a slight, I would say, governance tax. So you might only get 80% efficiency because of the human in the loop checks and data fencing. But look at the risk profile. It drops to a much more manageable 20%. So this 50%, 15% efficiency sacrifice is the insurance premium, if you will, that you pay for managing your liability. So, what does this mean for your daily work? And this brings us to big theme number three, the new legal operating model. So, historically, the legal team was reactive. You reviewed the contract after it was drafted. In 2026 and beyond, you must be a lot more proactive, proactive architects, rather. So you are no longer just reviewing the output, you are designing the system that creates the right output. So you are setting the rules of engagement, the data architecture, the ethical boundaries. So the new mandate is compliance by design and not as an afterthought. You're building the assembly line, not just inspecting the car after it is assembled or manufactured. So one, specific area where this architect role is critical is in procurement. So most companies, will not build their own AI agents, right? So you will maybe buy them from vendors like Salesforce or Microsoft or other startups. And this makes um, the compliance team the ultimate gatekeeper. You need to fundamentally rethink how you redline these agreements, these collaborations with other companies. You may want to ask, if your autonomous agent that we are going to be using hallucinates or even breaches a contract. In that case, who is responsible? Um, and you need to also maybe define a standard of care for the AI. What is the uptime? What is the accuracy rate? And probably, even get an insight into the black box, right? So that you can audit it if need be. So let's, have a checklist as far as governance and responsible AI is concerned. First, define, human in the loop thresholds. Decide now which decisions are too dangerous for an AI. Is it signing a contract? Well, how about scheduling a meeting? Maybe signing a contract might be a human, scheduling a meeting could be AI, and draw that line in ink. Second is um, mandating audit trail. So, tell your IT team, you know, maybe no logs, no launch. So, if it does not create a record, maybe we should not, deploy it. Third is enforcing data fencing. So, protect um, your data by physically preventing agents from sending data to the open web. And fourth is create the agent policy. Your generative AI policy covers writing. Your agent policy must cover acting. define, who's responsible when the agent acts. And implementing these four steps is the difference between a secure firm and a negligent one. I want to leave you with this perspective on the human element. In a world of infinite processing power, um, the resource that one has to pay attention to is not the intelligence, it is the judgment. And as Richard Susskind, famously said, the law is not just a system of rules; it is a system of judgment. AI can, process the rules faster than we ever will, but it cannot understand the nuance, the ethics, the human impact of applying those rules. And your job is not to compete with the agent on speed. There is no way we can, beat that. But our job as humans is to provide the judgment that the agent lacks. So the future, legal professional is not just a drafter. A future attorney is a supervisor of digital systems, applying wisdom where the machine only applies um, logic. So the future of 2026 um, and beyond is clear. The era of passive chatbot is ending. The era of the autonomous agent is beginning. And the choice, before us is stark. You can either ignore these agents, treat them like a traditional software, and then be blindsided by the liability they create, or you can embrace the role of the AI architect. You can build the governance, the policies, and the guardrails that make these systems safe. So we must govern the AI agents, or we will essentially be governed by their mistakes. And to learn, more about how many of these ideas are nicely, baked into the offerings at Black Hills I want to turn it over to the Chief AI Officer at Black Hills, Tom Marlowe.
Thanks, Dr. Rege. And I love that Richard Susskind quote. Um, I might have to put that one up around the office over here. Great. All right. So this is such an interesting topic. Um, I want to add a small piece of the pie and walk through a bit of what's shaping out to be a pretty significant shift in IP practice um, around this rise of agentic AI. So I'm going to briefly explore how this technology can work in IP practice, specifically where it makes sense, where it doesn't, and probably most importantly, how to stay in control while you're using it. Um, yeah, so Dr. Ray covered this distinction on this slide well in the first section, so we can really breeze by it here. I think the critical point that I'm going to want you to lock in on is uh, the question we should be asking is not necessarily should we use AI? Should we be looking at agents? That ship sailed. It's great. There's no going back. The real question is how to use it. Um, and even though pieces will be anonymous, sorry, autonomous, maybe anonymous, I don't know. A professional of some sort is going to be necessary at checkpoints along the way. So let me explain a bit of what I mean there. Uh, the this question, how much error is acceptable, kind of comes to the heart of a lot of what we're going to be looking at, particularly around decisions about automation in IP practice. So different tasks, as we know, have different tolerance for error. We can break that into these three categories. We're talking about high consequence tasks, things like claim drafting, office action responses, client communication. These are work product that your client relies on. The error cost in a final product is high. And the reality is you need human review, period. AI can assist, but a skilled IP attorney's got to sign off before things go anywhere. The acceptable error rate here, as we all probably know, is zero or near to it. Uh, then we've got intermediate tasks. These are things like prior art searching, initial technical analysis, reference compilation, pulling. There's some error tolerance here. Um, you should be spot checking, maybe diving deep into outliers. You're, in a sense, building confidence in a system while maintaining some oversight. But there's still a place where some margin for error isn't going to sink the ship. So there's maybe a few processing down the line. Then we've got lower risk tasks, transcription, document formatting, organization, document assembly. These are things that eat time, but don't carry high legal risk. So you can be a lot more comfortable with full automation. Let the agent handle it. These tasks are going to be more processing heavy. They're going to have processing of their results later on. So likely some eyes are going to review later work products. And even if there are some errors in this type of work, it's unlikely that it's going to propagate too far. And, if anything, if your downside is a little bit of a slower process where an issue pops up. And I think the key insight is that you don't have to think about it in binaries. It's not human does it or AI does it, period, for an entire process. It's where on the spectrum does each of these tasks in a process belong for you in your practice with your risk tolerance. So you're going to consider your comfort level, your firm's comfort level, your client's expectations, and that's kind of going to transition us into the next point where we're going to take a look at a couple of examples and see how things apply, and we can walk through actual kind of IP related workflows. So here's a concrete workflow we're all pretty familiar with: patent drafting, right? So we start with the inventor interview, transcribing that, automated, easy. An agent listens to the recording, generates a transcript. Error rate on transcription is low. And even if there's small mistakes here and there, they're catchable at future steps. You're not submitting a transcript to the patent office. It's being used internally. And next, we've got technical analysis. So an agent can read a transcript, pull out technical details, map key inventive concepts. This can be AI assisted, maybe with human review. You can read what's pulled out. You can validate that it makes sense. You can catch misunderstandings, or let the analysis flow to the next step. There's going to be more review down the line. So again, you might say, okay, I'm comfortable with a little veering off track. If it happens from time to time, we'll catch it. All right, next in the steps is the prior art search strategy. Again, this is maybe an intervention optional step. Let the agent determine the strategy, provide human assistance, or don't. Again, there's more to come down the line, so you can always catch things later. The agent then executes the searches based on strategy, runs through databases, compiles results, maybe does some initial relevance screening, and you can jump in and spot check if need be. One of the, I think, key points here that's worth recognizing is that the ship could be veering off course at any of these kind of successive steps in the process. The more automated, fully automated steps that you put in place, the more it could veer a little bit further and a little bit further. And so we're thinking about how far are you comfortable letting it veer before a correction? And at this point, our only downside here is time and rework, really. Okay, so then we get to the review step. You're probably doing this, right? You're reading through what was found, assessing whether it was prior art, how it's relevant to claims. This might be a more heavily expert judgment territory, but as models get better and better, you might be able to hand some of this more off to agents. Finally, we get to claims drafting, spec drafting. An agent can generate a draft based on everything that's happened above. It can pull in technical details, propose claim language, but there's really no question here. As a practitioner, you're reviewing, you're editing, you are approving before it goes out, and you're the filter and the owner of the final content. The beauty, let's say, of this workflow is that you've taken a process that used to require hours of attorney and paralegal time and compressed it to really focus the valuable attorney time on high value reviewing and decision making, while the agent did a lot of the legwork. And what we're seeing, and I think it's so interesting comparing what we're talking about today to when we're talking about this, let's say 5 years ago, is what falls into that category of legwork is growing. So that's I think that's exciting because it allows us as practitioners to really do higher and higher value work. All right, I'm going to run us through another example here, one again that we're all familiar with, office action response work. When you get a rejection, you need to analyze the office action. So AI here, not bad at doing the initial parsing, pulling out rejection grounds, reference cited, the examiner's reasoning. Maybe you step in here to review that analysis and make sure the agent understood things correctly. This can be AI assisted with some targeted human review. But again, since there's more steps down the line, this can also automate. So we can take that first step, make it automated, and send it right into the next one. So in the next step, the agent creates a shell, generates a template response document based on what was in that office action, the rejection types, etc. Some of this is going to be boilerplate. Some of this might be specific language tailored to the rejection. If you could add some review at this point where the agent adds in the analysis to the document. Then an agent's going to gather and analyze references. If the examiner cited a few prior art documents, the agent pulls them, can extract passages, it can mark them up, and help the attorney be able to do maybe spot checking to make sure that what it's identifying is what you would want it to be identifying at this step. And then we get to kind of a much more critical step around the strategy validation and the argument development, the argument creation. And this is where your expertise lives. You're developing the actual arguments against the rejection. Maybe the agent comes up with strategies, plans, or even draft arguments. The agent can help, It can do some research. It can provide case law. It can put together precedent. It can draft language. You've got to edit it. You've got to kind of put the judgment, to use a term from that quote that Dr. Rege provided, on top. So the practitioner in the loop is important here. Um, Although, as we've seen, the timing of the oversight can be played with. Okay, then the agent jumps back in, can do the final composing of the draft based on your guidance and your edits, that can then, of course, be adjusted. And afterwards, the agent can be used to assemble everything into a nice, coherent response document. And then we get back to the non-negotiable final review. Obviously, 100% human approval, you got to be there. You're putting your signature on this thing. It's your responsibility. So we've got to have that step kind of non-negotiable, right? The outcome here, instead of spending a full day on an office action response, you spend a few hours doing the high level legal work, analyzing the rejection, building arguments, making the key decisions, the judgments, and the AI, again, handles the legwork. So a little bit of a trend, right? Now, this slide, I think, is important, and it really gets to some of the optionality that I was talking about in the previous ones. And it's where things get personal to your practice. I'm describing frameworks here, but as a practitioner, as a firm, the decision has to be made of what's your comfort level. So each of the tasks or steps in a process have these different modes that can be applied to them. Full trust mode. You're comfortable with minimal intervention. These are routine tasks. Transcriptions that go straight through the system. Routine searches that can run without oversight. Things where you just trust the system. You expect anomalies might be flagged. This works particularly well for agents that have been well tested, or you're working with a trusted partner who you have confidence in their outputs. The next, spot check mode, the middle ground, the agent does the work. As a practitioner, you strategically review outputs, maybe set a threshold, uncertainty thresholds that can be flagged by an agent, spot checks. You're working on efficiency gains and balancing that with reasonable oversight. And finally, checkpoint mode. This is where you need or want approval gates. A human practitioner, somebody expert in the loop, before the agent moves on to the next step in the workflow, it waits. It's got to have a sign off. High consequence tasks obviously warrant this. But also maybe points in the process where you just want to be sure things are on track, to make sure, again, like kind of back to that analogy, the ship isn't veering too far off course. Yeah, it's mostly, how much control and possibility for rework do you want to manage? So, the honest truth, as an IP practitioner, most of our work will wind up in some sort of a hybrid model of, all of these. Low risk tasks are going to fall into that full trust mode. High value gets checkpoint mode, and intermediate work gets spot check mode. I think that spot check mode, that intermediate work, is where a lot of the practitioner to practitioner and firm to firm customization is going to happen. What's important is that you give this some sort of deliberate thought so that you're making choices along the way, or you're working with a partner who can kind of help guide that process. All right. To get to one of the other points that Dr. Rege was talking about, and I don't want to pass this up, particularly because it applies to what we do. I'm going to shift gears slightly. this is, I think, a part that sometimes gets underestimated. Transparency in AI is moving from what you might call a best practice to a legal requirement. Um, we're we're looking at real regulatory frameworks that are developing around transparency. You ought to understand how it impacts the tools that you're using. And beyond regulation, clients care. They want to know whether AI was used in analysis or drafting. I'm sure you've heard it. They want to know which steps and where human review was happening. They're asking questions because they're exposed to the same things probably in their work. And maybe they're being asked the same questions by their customers. So here's, I guess, what you could call the practical implication. You need to understand the tools that you're using and you need transparency. When you use an agent to draft a claim set, you probably want to know which prompts you used, how you edited the output, who reviewed it, and when, or at least have a guiding policy that drives that. And it's there's compliance concerns around all of this. At the very least, a practitioner should be able to, I think, see, edit, and adjust these things as they go. So I, of course, would be remiss if I didn't mention how Black Hills AI handles transparency in practice with agentic and generative systems. I think one of the things that we've really focused on a lot are what we call guided skills. This is in our Auto AI tool, where we've built pre-designed workflows specifically for IP professionals. This a quick plug, we've got a webinar coming up on Thursday that goes into more of our guided skills, and we had one last week. You can see the recording. There will be more to come. We build these so that you're not starting from scratch. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to do prompt engineering as an attorney to be able to use these tools. These are all practitioner validated, tested workflows. They could be around search, claims analysis, office action responses, etc. There's a number of them. Standardization is important because it means the workflows are auditable and repeatable. And what I particularly like about our approach is the transparency. All the prompts are visible. You can see exactly what the agent is being asked to do at each step. And more than that, they're editable. You can modify them. You can customize them to your practice. You can add your own prompts for tasks specific to your work. And, I think it matters because transparency without editability is just surveillance. Transparency with customization is empowerment. All right, little marketing language, I'm sorry. You're not just trusting a black box. You're working with a tool that you can understand and, let's say, shape to your needs. This is the model we should be pushing towards an IP practice. That's our philosophy, at least. Tools that do what they're supposed to do, show us exactly what they're doing, and let us modify them to our own standards. Okay, so these are the key takeaways. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. Grab the slides afterwards if you want to read them, but I would just be reading off this slide. So what I want to do is kind of leave us with the final thought, and that's smart IP professionals aren't going to choose between doing all the work themselves or pushing it all into AI. It's a false choice. In my opinion, the future belongs to practitioners who master that integration. Think of it, I suppose, like a decade ago, probably longer. If you didn't use email, you couldn't compete. It wasn't whether to use email, it was how. Agentic AI is on the same trajectory. In 2 or 3 years, firms winning in IP practice will be the ones that integrate it into their workflows. There's just so much to be gained from an efficiency perspective. Uh, but from a compliance perspective, keeping themselves in control of judgment, keeping clients in the loop about what's happening, and kind of keeping that governance piece at the center of the process. Um, Good news, you're obviously already thinking about it. You're in this webinar for a reason, so that puts you ahead of the curve. So, now it's about moving from thinking to implementing thoughtfully, and that's what we've tried to lay out today. So, thank you, everybody attending. I know that was a lot of information. We can open things up to questions. Of course, also thank you, Dr. Rege, for the all of the great technical background at the beginning.
Sure,
Um,
anytime.
yeah. So I see a couple of questions. So I'm going to just go ahead and kind of dive into these. And Manjeet, between you and I think we can handle these.
Sure.
So the first question is, when establishing a governance layer over agentic AI, does deterministic code used provide a better defense than other agentic AI? If the latter is used, should this be based on different foundational models to reduce the potential for systemic errors?
So let me maybe just start off saying that I wouldn't, have the governance layer over the agentic AI. I would look at the governance framework as an overarching framework that guides what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in all aspects of AI, whether it is generative or whether it is agentic or not. And through that lens, I would then, evaluate the risks and liabilities based on that. I don't know if you have other thoughts, Tom.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think just generally speaking, the difference between say deterministic code and using AI in any kind of manner, right? From a compliance perspective, is really only that you get to pre-vet the deterministic code, right? So it gives you the opportunity to say, okay, yeah, this is exactly how I want it to operate. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's good and in compliance. It's just where the oversight is allowed to happen. So, um, so I think I wouldn't necessarily say, oh yeah, deterministic, using deterministic code to double check on something is going to be great. It could be, but again, it ultimately comes back down to um, your kind of well, the overarching compliance policy. All right. Let's see. Here's another question. What are the risks and advantages to getting a governance agent to define the governance framework?
Yeah. So, I mean, the clear, advantage is the speed, right? I mean, and it goes back to my earlier slide about uh, you might get 95% accuracy, but then your risk goes up as well. But by keeping the human in the loop, and governance is where I think human can impart the corporate values, the judgment. So outsourcing that part for speed. And again, as far as governance framework is concerned, that is not something that I would typically be inclined to do because it is not you do not define governance frameworks and guidelines on a regular basis, right? That is where you would typically see the value of automating because that is a repetitive task. You define a framework typically once in a while at the beginning, and then you revisit that on a regular basis. So I think that is where a human can probably play a role. Um, yeah. Um,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Um, okay. So here's a good question. I'm able to change the guardrails on many Gen AI tools by the way I prompt. Should I be concerned that one agent will bend the guardrails of another agent? So I guess when you've got two agents working in succession, um, there's the guardrails that you put in at the beginning can start to get fuzzy, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is where the collaboration between the different agents come into play. So if all of them, that is, if different agents have been are part of the same technology ecosystem, I think it is easier to specify the guardrails. If you have the different agents coming from different vendors, I think that is where the risks are going to go up a little bit. But if you have your own internal agents, as I said, a finance agent, a compliance agent, all of those can conform to your same corporate values. And that is where you have a much better control.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And to a certain extent, let me know if you agree with this. You you lose some of that control by having like successive agent work. And I think that's part of the trade-off. Um,
Right,
yeah.
right.
So it's one of the things like you've mentioned where you've just got to either build in checkpoints um, or adjust to
And
your
longer the workflow, longer is the risk.
sure. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Let's see. Okay, I got another question. Generative AI suffers from lack of explicability, the black box issue. How can we keep an audit trail for good governance?
Yeah, so I think the generative AI or even AI agents um, can be forced to explain the actions. Um, if you have used the agentic mode in ChatGPT, for example,
Hmm.
based on your prompt, it will give you its line of thinking. So it will tell you things like, okay, I'm currently thinking, this is what the user is asking. Let me now do this research. So all of that, you can basically have the agent document that so that when you see the eventual goal accomplished, you at least have a trail of how or what the steps were in that line of thinking. So there is a way to kind of make that black box a little bit more less opaque or transparent.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing it a lot more, particularly if you're using like you're saying the thinking or the deep reasoning modes.
Right.
They provide it, and a part of that too is because of some of the regulations that have been put in place recently. So these larger models are being required to provide it. So some of what you saw that was very black box maybe 2 years ago is not going to be allowed to be uh, today or next year. So I think you're going to be able to see keeping that audit trail is going to become more and more easy. All right. I don't see any other questions, and we're at the top of the hour here. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Manjeet as well. Thanks. It's always a pleasure going over
Thank you.
these topics. Um, and as always, don't don't hesitate for anyone on the call or anyone listening in to the recording. Don't hesitate to reach out to us with any follow-up specific to your practice, to your workflow, your concerns. We are always open ears and want to hear what you're wondering about. Where do you see agentic AI fitting into your workflow? What obstacles are you anticipating? We love this topic. Okay, with that, I'm going to call our webinar. Again, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day.